So what we can show here is that unlike in Europe, where agriculture was introduced by migration and by people coming to Europe, in Anatolia, the emergence of agriculture, the so-called Neolithic revolution, happened from within the population. So it was actually just a cultural change, it was not a biological change.
8,000 years ago, almost everyone living between Greece and the British Isles vanished. Up to 98% were gone in some regions, their entire way of life erased. The official story said farming merely swept across Europe, reshaping diets and tools. But recent DNA evidence reveals a far more shocking truth. It was not only cultural change, it was a wave of population replacement so complete it left almost nothing of the continent's original people. So who were the newcomers who rewrote Europe's genetic code? And what hidden ancestry did they carry? The answer will expose mysteries no one saw coming. Picture a village of 100 people. In the Balkans, after the arrival of farming, only 2 would still trace their ancestry to the original hunter-gatherers. 98 out of every 100 vanished from the genetic record. In Central Europe, the numbers are nearly as stark. 90 to 95 of every 100 locals were replaced by newcomers. These are not just minor shifts or slow blends. The DNA evidence points to a near total population turnover, one that swept from the Aegean north and west across the continent. The numbers are difficult to grasp. In the space of a few generations, the vast majority of Europe's first inhabitants disappeared, leaving almost no genetic legacy in the regions where they had lived for thousands of years. The newcomers, farmers from Anatolia, did not simply bring new crops and pottery. They became the ancestors of nearly everyone who lived in these lands for the next several millennia. Such a transformation is not visible in stone tools or pottery shards. Archaeologists once debated whether farming spread by sharing ideas or by the movement of people. The scale of replacement revealed by ancient DNA leaves little doubt. In the Balkans, only a tiny fraction, just 2 out of every 100, carried the genes of the old hunter-gatherers. In Central Europe, the original population was reduced to a faint echo. These statistics demand an explanation. What could cause almost an entire population to vanish, replaced so thoroughly that their genetic signatures are barely detectable today? The evidence is so stark that it reshapes our understanding of the Stone Age. To track such a sweeping change, scientists needed new tools, ways to peer into the past, and follow the trail of the newcomers who transformed Europe's DNA. The search for answers would begin in the laboratory, with the fragile bones of the continent's earliest farmers. Beneath the fields and forests of Europe, archaeologists found a silence that physical artifacts could not explain. Layer after layer, the soil revealed sharp breaks in the story of its people. In one stratum, the remains of tall, robust hunter-gatherers. Above them, a sudden shift. Bones shorter and slighter, tools and pottery of unfamiliar style, settlements arranged in new patterns. The old ways ended abruptly, replaced by something foreign. Yet the clues left behind were mute on the question that mattered most: what happened to the people themselves? For decades, researchers sifted through fragments, arrowheads, charred seeds, the pottery of vanished hands. The record spoke of changing diets and new technologies, but not of the bodies that used them. Were the new customs learned from neighbors, or did entire populations sweep in, leaving only traces of the past? The evidence was ambiguous. Some sites showed continuity in daily life, others a break so complete it felt like a lost civilization. Stone tools and ceramics could be copied or traded, but the people behind them remained shadows, their fate uncertain. The continent's ancient villages and burial grounds offered little comfort. In some places, entire cemeteries disappeared from the record, replaced by newcomers whose customs and grave goods bore no resemblance to what came before. The absence of overlap, no gradual blend, no slow transition, hinted at something more profound than cultural change. It was as if the land itself had been emptied and repopulated, but the stones and bones would not say how. The puzzle demanded a new kind of evidence, something that could reach across millennia and speak for those who left no written words. In quiet corners of Europe's museums, teams began to gather the remains of these first farmers. In sealed rooms, behind filtered air and layers of protective gear, scientists prepared to coax secrets from fragments no wider than a grain of rice. The hope was simple yet daunting: to find in the code of ancient DNA the missing link between the vanished world and the one that followed. In a sealed laboratory in Leipzig, the air itself became an enemy. Every surface was wiped, every tool sterilized, every movement deliberate. The stakes were high. A single skin cell from a researcher could erase the past. At the center of the room, a technician in full protective gear hovered over a splinter of ancient bone, barely larger than a fingernail. The sample came from a Neolithic grave in Central Europe, dated to around 5,500 BC, one of 24 skeletons recovered from sites across Germany, Austria, and Hungary. These were the first farmers of Europe, the people who had swept away the continent's hunter-gatherers. Their bones held secrets that stone tools and pottery could not reveal. Extracting DNA from remains this old was a technical gamble. The fragments were tiny, degraded, and easily overwhelmed by modern contamination. The team worked in silence, knowing a single mistake could destroy months of painstaking excavation. Under the lens of a microscope, the technician teased out a few strands of mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed down the maternal line, preserved like a message in a bottle for nearly 7,000 years. When the results came back, the numbers stunned everyone in the room. 1 in 4 of these early European farmers, 25%, carried a mitochondrial DNA, a type that is now almost extinct. Today, only about 0.2% of Europeans carry this lineage. That is 150 times lower than what the lab found in these ancient bones. For every 500 people walking the streets of modern Europe, maybe one carries the same maternal marker that was once so common among the continent's first farmers. The lead geneticist stared at the data, then checked the controls, then ran the numbers again. The signal was real. This rare DNA type, so abundant in the Neolithic, had nearly vanished. The implications were immediate and unsettling. If the first farmers replaced almost all the local hunter-gatherers, why did their own genetic legacy not survive? What happened to the people whose arrival had transformed Europe? The team debated the possibilities late into the night. Was there a catastrophic event, a second wave of migration, or slow attrition over thousands of years? The evidence from the bones was clear, but the story behind the numbers remained hidden. The technician, exhausted but driven, prepared new samples for testing. The hunt was on for more clues. The lab had cracked open the door to Europe's genetic past, but the ancestry of these first farmers was still an unanswered question. The search would need to go wider, deeper, and further back in time. In a remote valley in central Anatolia, a hillside cave held the bones that would rewrite the story of Europe's first farmers. The discovery came in 2019, when a field archaeologist brushing away soil at Pinarbasi uncovered the skeleton of a hunter-gatherer who lived 15,000 years ago, long before the first wheat was planted or sheep were herded. The team collected a tooth, packed it in sterile tubes, and sent it to a genetics lab. Weeks later, the genome sequence arrived. The ancient Anatolians' DNA carried markers found in the earliest farmers of the region, evidence of a deep, unbroken line stretching from the last ice age to the dawn of agriculture. When researchers compared this genome to those of Neolithic farmers across Anatolia, the match was unmistakable. 80 to 90% of the DNA in the first Anatolian farmers traced straight back to these local hunter-gatherers. There was no sign of a foreign population sweeping in from the south or east to bring farming with them. Instead, the people of Anatolia learned to cultivate crops and herd animals themselves, then carried these skills outward as their numbers grew. As the Neolithic spread, the map of migration took shape. From the heart of Anatolia, two main corridors opened. One led northwest through the Balkans, following the Danube River as it wound through forests and grasslands into the heart of Central Europe. The other hugged the Mediterranean coast, passing through Greece and Italy, then westward to Spain. Archaeologists traced these routes not just by the pottery styles and settlement shapes left behind, but now, unmistakably, by the DNA embedded in ancient bones. The genetic trail followed the same paths as the earliest farming villages, confirming what maps and artifacts had only hinted. A cartographer working with the latest genetic data charted these corridors on a digital map. The spread was not random. The Danube and Mediterranean routes acted as arteries, pulsing with the movement of people, livestock, and seeds. Along these paths, the genetic signature of Anatolia appeared again and again in Neolithic cemeteries from Greece to Hungary, from Italy to the Atlantic coast. The same maternal and paternal lineages, rooted in Anatolia, surfaced in distant villages separated by hundreds of miles and centuries of travel. The evidence was now overwhelming. Europe's first farmers were not a patchwork of local converts. They were the descendants of Anatolian hunter-gatherers who had adopted farming and set out in waves, carrying their genes and way of life across the continent. The story that had been hidden in the bones of a single ancient forager now stretched across rivers, mountains, and seas. Yet locked within this sweeping migration, there were subtle anomalies, unexpected threads in the genetic fabric that would soon puzzle even the most seasoned researchers. A technician in Hungary stared at a sequencing readout, waiting for the next line of code to settle into place. The bone was Neolithic, nearly 7,000 years old, from a woman buried along the upper Tisza River. The result was unmistakable: mitochondrial haplogroup N9A. The same genetic marker is common today in Korea, Japan, and parts of China. In modern Europe, it is almost entirely absent. The distance from that Hungarian grave to the rice paddies of East Asia is more than 7,000 kilometers. It was a gap no one expected to bridge in a single DNA strand. The first reaction in the lab was disbelief. One scientist suspected a mix-up. Another, more cautious, proposed contamination, maybe a stray cell from a technician or a fingerprint on a pipette. But the findings repeated in sample after sample, from different sites, processed in independent laboratories. Each time, N9A surfaced in the genetic code of Neolithic European farmers, especially those linked to the linear pottery culture. The protocols had been airtight: negative controls, double extractions, damage checks. The signal was real. A researcher from Leipzig argued for caution, pointing to the rarity of N9A in modern Europe and the lack of clear archaeological links to East Asia. But a rival in Copenhagen pushed the data, insisting that the evidence could not be ignored. How could a maternal lineage so common in East Asia appear out of nowhere in the heart of Neolithic Hungary? And why would it vanish almost completely from the continent in the millennia that followed? The debate spilled out into journals and conference halls. Some theorized that N9A had traveled west in a forgotten migration, carried by a population that vanished without a trace. Others suggested a relic Eurasian group, once spread across the steppe, now erased except for these fleeting genetic footprints. The simplest answer, laboratory error, collapsed under the weight of replication. The presence of N9A in ancient bones forced scientists to redraw the web of prehistoric migration, to imagine connections that spanned continents and defied every tidy narrative. The mystery of N9A remains, a reminder that the story of Europe's first farmers is still full of gaps, and that every answer can open a new question. When the steppe herders rode in from the east around 4,500 BC, they brought more than horses and wagons. They carried a new genetic legacy that would sweep across Europe, leaving a mark still visible in DNA today. The arrival of these nomadic pastoralists, descendants of the Yamnaya culture, triggered a second great replacement. In the wake of their migration, the genetic landscape shifted again. In the Balkans, the legacy of the first farmers faded even further. In Central and Northern Europe, the newcomers' ancestry soon outweighed that of both farmers and the last hunter-gatherers. Yet the story did not unfold evenly. In Sardinia, the mountains and sea acted as barriers, preserving up to 80% of early farmer ancestry, making the island a living genetic time capsule. In Southern Europe, about half the DNA still traces back to those Anatolian settlers. In Central Europe, that figure drops to around 30 to 50%. In the north, it falls lower still. Just 10 to 30% of the average genome reflects the first farmers, while steppe ancestry dominates. This patchwork is the result of three great waves: the hunter-gatherers who first peopled the continent, the Anatolian farmers who replaced them, and the steppe herders who swept in later. Each wave left its imprint, but few regions escaped the churn of migration and replacement. The genetic map of Europe today is a palimpsest, a record written, erased, and rewritten by moving peoples. The bones themselves record these changes. Early farmers, shorter and more lightly built than their predecessors, carried a gene known as SLC24A5 that lightened their skin. When the steppe herders arrived, average male height rebounded, returning closer to that of the ancient hunter-gatherers. The living evidence of these shifts is scattered across the continent, in both the bodies and the DNA of modern Europeans. Social patterns, too, left their trace. Cemetery studies reveal that Neolithic farming communities were patrilocal. Men tended to remain in their birthplace, passing land and status to their sons, while women often came from distant villages. The genetic signatures of these choices, low male diversity and high female diversity, still echo in ancient graves. The story of Europe's first farmers is not just one of migration and replacement, but of how people lived, married, and built their worlds. In the layers of legacy left behind, the ancient past still shapes the present. Europe's genetic roots reveal a cycle of migration, replacement, and disappearance, where even lineages once common are now almost extinct. As population movements reshape continents today, ancient DNA reminds us identity is never fixed and origins are rarely simple. The puzzle of who we are isn't finished. It's still being rewritten, one sequence at a time. What questions will the next strand answer? Share your thoughts below.